I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Amy Castoro.
AI can bring a lot of information, but it can't care. It can pretend to care. And so when we're working with families, we're tapping into what they really care about. And for most, it's a deep yearn for more connection.
And the quote that you included in the book from Albert Einstein, problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. And I read that, and I read that, and I read that, because that's so often with all of us. Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacies series. I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Amy Castoro. Amy is the president of the Williams Group. You're going to learn a lot about the Williams Group today as we explore the over half a century of research that they have been digging into from their founding by Roy Williams, and the application then for families on really important work regarding the development of future generations. We speak a lot about the preparation of the assets for the future generations when we talk about estate planning and taxes and financial planning, and that's all important work. But most importantly, that's just a tool to be utilized by future generations for them to seek out their purpose, to pursue it, to be empowered, not enabled. We have never come across anyone that said, wow, we want our next generation to be trust fund children. But then how do you do that? How do you proactively then approach with intentionality, which requires time and conversations and asking of questions? And sometimes, and a lot of times, it's best to bring in a third party alongside you and your family to explore those very conversations. And you're going to gain a lot of depth of insight and wisdom from Amy and from their experience and from their research and from their team to impart upon you, as well as resources to reach out to and consider for the future of your family. So with that introduction, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Amy, thank you again for joining me in the studio to have this conversation. But before we talk about Amy and the Williams Group, I actually want to kick off this session a little bit differently, because just yesterday I received an email from Mark Phillips. Mark is the founder and managing partner of 11 Tribes Venture Capital. And he shared this communication that we're entering the wisdom economy. And I just felt this was so appropriate for the conversation that we're about to embark on. He goes on, when knowledge is no longer scarce, what remains valuable? Wisdom? You can get answers about anything from AI, but how you use those answers takes wisdom. Wisdom is how to live. It is a residue of mistakes metabolized by time and reflection. It cannot be rushed, and it cannot be coded. It is an embodied, as in felt in the body, experience and guidance from the inside. In this, as this pace of change, right? We've talked a lot about disruptive technology as a firm and in these Entrepreneurial Legacies series with guests, and just the pace of change and how that's affecting business and the transformation, and how we even at Clearwater leverage technology and leverage AI in the application of the work that we do. But the subject of today, I think, really does come back to the piece that can't be automated away, right? As Mark captures here. So I just love what he captured. So with that, let's talk about the Williams Group. So if you can help listeners get a bit of an understanding of then who's the Williams Group and how are they going to bring wisdom to this space of family governance. And
Yeah, I appreciate the question. You know, we've been bringing wisdom to families for 60 years. Williams Group was started 60 years ago by Roy Williams. Roy came out of the San Francisco 49ers. He was a defensive tackle, and when he came out, he looked around and he saw a lot of his friends were not only losing their wealth, which unfortunately isn't terribly uncommon for professional athletes,
Right.
or at least in those days,
right,
but their families were breaking up. And he wanted to know why that was. It broke his heart because he knew they worked pretty hard to get there.
yeah,
And so the Williams Group today is 20 coaches across the U.S. We work in the U.S. and Canada. And we've served over 800 families, all in the ultra high net worth space.
In a lot of writings, a lot of academic work brought to the work of working with families, and we'll reference some of the books that Roy's written, co-authored in the past, along with you, and a more recent publication that you've put out. And there's just some great deep content that comes from the book. But there's an awful lot where the book can bring knowledge, right? Just like we spoke of, the book can bring knowledge. Where does the Williams Group then tap into wisdom in order to share that back with families?
The word that keeps coming up for me is care. So AI can bring a lot of information, but it can't care. It can pretend to care. And so when we're working with families, we're tapping into what they really care about. And for most, it's a deep yearn for more connection. That is embodied. That comes from the inside out. You could call that wisdom, because when they start to tap that deeper level of yearning, that place where they say, yeah, what matters to me is where my authenticity lies. That feels like truth.
Yeah, and gets to the human experience.
Most definitely.
So what brought you then? So Roy's work's been going on for over half a century. What brought you as the president of the Williams Group to the Williams Group?
I was getting my coaching certification, and there was another coach in that program with me, Peter Yaholkovsky, who's worked with the Williams Group for a long time. And through Peter, I met Roy, went out to meet Roy. And my background includes work with Grant Thornton as a management consultant, working with small businesses. And do we have the right people in the right seats? And are we all on the same page about what we'd like to have happen? Do we keep the business, sell the business, grow the business? And then I had also spent some time with the Walt Disney Company, where we learned a lot about how to build a culture, leadership development, how to make a team more effective. And between those two experiences, along with a lot of other things that I've done along the way, not to exclude ballet, because learning how to dance was pretty important in these meetings. But I
do not have on my resume, right?
Yeah, I will say that it was just an amazing full circle. And the opportunity to meet Roy with his huge heart and deep commitment to the well-being of families.
So that care component too.
Exactly.
I mean, it's felt by you and the team. Help individuals have a little bit of the scope and scale. I mean, this isn't just you and Roy putting out books and content.
Right.
The scope and scale of the organization to be serving families.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, we have 20 coaches. These coaches are all pretty finely tuned. They're all experienced coaches. What's unique about us is we operate in two main domains. So we are a learning company. People think we'll come in and we'll fix them, but our job is really to work ourselves out of a job by having these families learn a lot of the same skills that we're teaching them. And so what will happen over time is they become embodied. These skills become habitual, so that we've shifted the fabric of the family.
Okay.
All of the coaches are deeply trained in what we call linguistics, as well as somatics.
Okay.
And the short answer is how the infrastructure of language builds a future, and the congruence between what we say and how we say it would be the somatic component.
When you go back to your management consultant days, right, and working with businesses, and there's always this conversation, are we working in the business or on the business? In that intentionality, are you living in your family, or are you working on your family? So the first book I'm going to go to and reference, this is Preparing Heirs, that Roy co-authored, and I'm just going to read a small part here. And this is under a subsection, the impact of wealth transfers to heirs. Given the potential for wealth to be used for good or ill, or simply to be wasted with no detectable impact, the preparation of heirs to manage wealth becomes one of the major responsibilities financially successful parents face. That last line is this becomes, right, the preparation of heirs, not the preparation of the assets, right? There's that saying that, are you preparing the assets for the heirs, your estate planning documents, your organization, inside, outside, your taxable estate, growth assets, et cetera. But the preparation of heirs to manage the wealth becomes one of the major responsibilities of financially successful. So, and that's a major responsibility. how do individuals even get their heads around that, going, wow, that, yes, we've achieved this level of wealth. And I'm not going to put a number on it because I think too many people get into the relativism component. But any level of wealth that comes into play, if that's a responsibility, how do people even get started?
It's a great question. The Williams Group tends to serve families that are north of 20 million because that's where there tends to be more liquid cash. And so preparing the heirs becomes even more apparent as a need. When we say preparing heirs, yes, the table stakes are that they understand diversification, that they understand the pluses and minuses, and that they're able to spell fiduciary, for example.
Right.
But for us, preparing the heirs goes back to a saying that Roy always said, the two most important days are the day you're born and the day you find out why. So less of a receivership orientation. What am I getting and how do I be responsible for that? More of a, how am I contributing? Why do I get out of bed every morning? In what way am I a link in this chain of legacy? And how can I help it continue? So to start those conversations is often as young as 5 years old. That's where accountability and responsibility can start to show up. It might be clearing the napkins from the table. It might be learning to say, I'm sorry, or telling the truth. It might be in the older years, a bake sale. We had a family where a young girl in grammar school had learned about, I think it was monkeys in Africa that were starting to, I can't think of the word, but they were becoming extinct.
Okay.
And she thought, well, let's have a bake sale and send that money over to Africa. Not a lot of money, but that went on for a long time. That bake sale happened even after she left the grammar school.
Gotcha.
So it was a way that she could have a contribution.
Yeah.
In a very real way. It's sometimes looking at encouraging the behaviors you want. So if they save $5, you might match it.
Yeah.
And then, the standard.
In the last episode, Kirby Rosbach and I were talking about my grandchildren's lemonade stand over at our house and how my son-in-law had him signing loan documents in order to get this out and then paying taxes in the end. And then the charitable component of just being introduced into the thought process. And you even mentioned just basic like courtesies. How do you engage the world around you and take responsibility by cleaning up after yourself?
Exactly.
I mean, it can start at a very young age.
People say, at what age should the kids become responsible for wealth? And they can start to learn that at a very young age. We worked with a family where they were a billionaire level, flew private, a bunch of friends went, and kids too. And they walked into a gift shop, and the daughter said, I would like that. And she was young, maybe she was around 10. And it was a stuffed animal, and maybe it was $20. And the dad said, let's see if you've earned your allowance by the end of the week. Right. As hard as it is. And I think that's probably one of the most profound things one of the patriarchs had said to me. He said, the hardest job I have is learning to say no when I can say yes.
Yes, yeah.
And the second hardest job is that he can give them anything, but he can't give them desperation, right? Because so many of our clients came from humble beginnings. And so what they've learned is through hard work to provide for their family. They can give them anything, but not desperation.
Well, and that's what's, so the book, Strangers in Paradise, that James Grubman wrote, I still reference that because especially for first generation entrepreneurial wealth creators, which is still a majority of wealth, given how it gets diluted over time and turned over, that they've come from that little and now they've created, they could buy or do anything. And yet how do they instill that in others? As I even think through that, because there's so many individuals who are like, oh, those were the glory days, right? When we did this and the war stories and how they navigated. And yet they want better for their children. They want better for the subsequent generations. And yet those generations aren't going to have the same war stories unless somehow, how did they navigate that? What are some ways for people to be thinking about how do they give the desperation? How do they instill that? How do they set up those scenarios? $20 to buy a stuffed animal. All of a sudden now it's like I got to go work for my allowance. How do you navigate and do that?
I'm remembering another story where a guy had put his son into business, and the business was failing terribly. Again, the dad flew over, sat down with him in a very small office. This guy had 2 kids of his own. They were living in a studio apartment trying to make it work. And the son said, "What do I do? Can you help me out here financially?" And the dad just looked at him and he said, "Actually, I think this is one of those things you need to figure out on your own."
Yeah.
And he turned around and left. I met that son maybe 2 years later, and he said that was the most difficult day of his life because he expected his father to help him out,
Yeah.
but it was also the most rewarding because he figured it out,
Yeah.
and now the business is thriving. And so I think where it comes from is a fundamental sense of purpose. When these kids start to figure out not just what they're doing, but who they are becoming, who they're being while they're doing what they're doing. We worked with another family where the kids were 6, 9, and 11, billionaire family. And the mom was getting concerned because they were exposed to all kinds of things that she was not exposed to. She was a substitute teacher. And so when we worked with them, we said to the kids, well, what do you love about each other? And so the boy would say, well, my sister is really brave. And my other sister is really smart. I can tell her anything. We said to the girls, what do you love about your brother? And they said, well, he always knows where the car is parked. And he can do our math homework like nobody's business. So the point of the whole conversation was that we were really encouraging them to focus on who they are as human beings.
Yeah.
What lights them up?
Yeah.
What identities are they producing?
And I love the word you use, which is purpose, right? I mean, the day you were born and the day you discover why, it does get to purpose. And there are a lot of individuals that have observed unscientifically, not technical research, but whether they retire in a traditional sense from corporate executive role, whether they sell their company, that over under. If there's a little bit of catch your breath, take a little bit of time off, right? Go golf or fish or do whatever you want. But usually in time, if they don't understand the clarity of that purpose, they end up feeling lost. Doesn't matter how much money they have, they feel lost. How do you believe somebody goes about that process of discovering purpose?
Do you know, I think it can be a big question to say to somebody, even as a teenager or probably where they feel it most when they're in college, what's your purpose? That's a tough one to answer.
Because it's tough for adults. It's tough for adults. It's tougher,
Yeah. You know, it comes back to what we opened with around purpose, around care and wisdom. It's what they're interested in, what matters to them. If they could solve one problem in the world and work backwards from that, what would then be their first step? It's exposure. It's them being willing to shadow people and learn whether or not that's something that lights them up. But it isn't just a mental construct, like, oh, I should do this because that will pay this much money. The people who find the most satisfaction are the ones that can feel on the inside, what do they really care about? What would be fascinating for them? The challenge for a lot of the next gen family members we meet with is they're growing up inside of a shadow of enormous wealth, and they feel a certain responsibility to have some kind of role that is worthy of that. And so those conversations, when moms and dads can have that conversations, is, look, yes, we are more fortunate than most. And what we care deeply about is that you're happy with what you're doing and that you try new things.
Right.
And so I think really encouraging that.
So although you said the Williams Group works with families 20 million and above a lot because of some of the liquidity that comes into play. But a lot of times these families also have their private direct investments, their company or companies, plural. Then you end up with this intersection of, does the next generation believe that they should be in that? Do they think their purpose, just because they carry the same last name, it means that they should work in the company?
Yeah.
The parents of saying, just because you share the same last name doesn't mean you're equipped to work in the company. Do you get involved with some of that succession planning then that takes place within running the business versus running the family?
All the time. Yeah. So we have a mix of clients. Some are family businesses and some have sold the business. And so now it's a post-liquidity situation. When we're dealing with families where they have still a business or there's a big family office, we find that there's something out there called fake jobs. I heard about this recently at a family office event, and I just wrote a little thing on it. But what happens in these fake jobs is a couple of things. One, a family member takes a position because they think they should, and they know they're over their skis, and they really don't like it, and they go in the least amount of time to the office, and they kind of keep their head down, and it's really a push for them.
Yeah.
Or they're getting a distribution from the family business. They don't have a role, but they have a title, and they're embarrassed to receive those funds. They don't really know whether or not they should or how they should be with that.
Yeah.
So really what that one comes down to is transparency, where if there's a distribution happening and the next gen isn't actually working in the business, but they have a role, maybe there is some way to co-design what way they can contribute. Maybe they show up at the Christmas party. Maybe it's more explicit about expectations that they have.
Yeah.
Maybe it is that they have an office, but their role is co-designed what the title means. Maybe they don't want to be the person who's looked at as the head of operations or, quote, running a division. Maybe they want to be the person who's out there making friends and letting everybody know that this family cares.
Right. What do you think motivates or drives some individuals that were the founder of the family business, and they so want the next generations to be in that same business?
What drives them?
Yeah, well, like what versus there's an aspect of saying, well, no, you want the next generations to discover their purpose, and that could be ballet, that could be music, that could be a wide array of various areas that somebody could find their purpose in the work and that calling for themselves. And yet sometimes there's that pressure coming from the expectation of especially the founding family members to be like, well, no, you need to work in the family business.
Yeah.
Have you
Happens all the
discovered?
time.
Yeah, and have
All
you
the
discovered
time.
like what the motivation or driver is on?
I think it's legacy.
Yeah.
I think they have a dream and they have a commitment. They see a way. They want to instill more of the entrepreneurial spirit that's made them successful. Families come to us in one of two ways. One, proactively, where they're saying, we want to get ahead of those conversations. We don't want that situation to happen. Or reactively, we've got a bunch of kids that work in the family business, but we can't get them to come to a meeting. So I think it's legacy, and when the patriarch reaches a place where they say, okay, we're stronger together, and that means what I said earlier, co-designing what that future is actually going to look like, that's when it works. But, we worked with a guy who was in his 90s, early 90s, and that place where he had a lot of control, he had 2 generations working the business, he walked up to his daughter and he said, I'm finally ready. I'm ready to give up the reign and let you run the company. And she said, do you know, I just came from my retirement party, but you could check with your grandson. So I think what drives them is legacy and a desire to have that safety net of business and opportunity for future family members.
And so that's good. So you've got a book, Bridging Generations, Transitioning Family Wealth and Values for a Sustainable Legacy. This is the book, holding it up on the screen here. People can find it online. Again, Bridging Generations by Roy Williams and Amy Castoro to look it up. And there in the last chapter, on legacy itself, but before we go there, there's an aspect in chapter 3, the main drivers of family harmony. The odds are not in your favor is the subject. And the quote that you included in the book from Albert Einstein, problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. And I read that and I read that and I read that because that's so often with all of us. When we look up and whatever the challenge would be, whatever it might be, the range of it, we often use, what got us here won't get us there, or who got us here won't get us there. You just go ahead and insert the word. So the thinking that got you to where you're at today probably isn't going to get you to where you aspire to be. And in aspiring to the legacy component of that struck me significantly. And you go on to talk about the technical aspect of what we do, taxes and legal documents, some of the knowledge components that come in, and that all has to be done really well. But the research that you all have done over the decades doesn't point to that being usually a point of failure. It comes into trust and communication.
Yeah.
So first, then, how do you just what is a breakdown in trust? What is a breakdown in communication? If that accounts for 65% of the failure of wealth to transfer, well, what is a failure of wealth transference, and then what is that breakdown in communication and trust?
So, I always ask, what does a successful wealth transfer look like? How will you know it when you see it? And those responses over my 15 years tend to dial back to two things. The family maintains unity and relationship, and they maintain control of their assets. So if that's the goal line, what's the role of trust and communication inside of that?
Okay.
Where you don't have trust, you have control. Where you don't have trust, you have control. So if we look at
and you said it twice, but I'm going to say it again, right?
Where
you don't have trust, you have control. And so this control aspect,
exactly,
especially when it comes to estate strategy, right? In terms of, okay, when do assets move outside the taxable estate? How do you leverage the gifting that takes place? How that comes into play? And absolutely, there's been certain individuals, it's like, here's the math behind all this works. And when you ask it that pointedly of going, this mathematically, right? Legal, tax, financial, here's what makes sense to do, what holds you back, and the word that comes back is control.
right.
And so that's why. So I want to let's pause on that for a little bit. That control piece of it.
Exactly.
What possesses somebody to say I'm going to take control and have economic harm in a lot of ways to future generations for the sake of control?
Yeah.
What drives that? What motivates that?
My guess
how does somebody overcome it?
Right. My experience with it is that they care. They want this to last as long as possible. And their training has been through estate planning, tax strategies, wealth preservation. That's what they understand. And so they're going to put levers in place to lock this up as best as possible. But what the research that Roy's organization did 60 years ago, close to 60 years ago, was to say, estate planning is designed to take care of assets, not relationships. And so if the other half of the equation is the relationship piece, then that's not always control. That's co-authoring what the future is going to look like. So what drives the control is always fear. Fear is underneath control. How do we have meaningful conversations to address the fear? When we look at the biggest breakdown in trust, the senior generation doesn't trust the junior generation to be a responsible steward. Largely because there hasn't been a conversation about what that means. What's the behaviors that supports that? Trust breaks down the other way too. The junior generation doesn't trust the senior generation to transition it well because nobody is talking about it. And so silence is the great destroyer of potential.
I have one family where I'm like, well, need to be engaging. You have, in this case, 320-somethings. And it's like, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to make it a thing. I'm like, you're making it a thing by not talking about it, right? So it's like, so let's at least make it a thing by speaking to it and actually addressing it and disclose in an age-appropriate way, in a capability and the ability for individuals to comprehend.
And that's the issue for most of these families. We don't teach the skills of how to navigate conflict or differing perspectives in a healthy way. We don't talk about how to build, manage, and repair trust in the schools. All we do is we inherit the same communication patterns. So we don't just transition wealth, we transition communication patterns. And almost nearly all of my clients say, I learned how to communicate from my parents. And they never told us about the wealth. So I really don't know how to go about this. And so it's really a learning. How do we have conversations where we're understanding what really matters to somebody and we can figure out how to go forward together? That's vital, not just in the wealth transition conversation, but in marriages and leadership and the world we're in.
I was actually speaking with somebody earlier today just about that. We've got to make sure that we don't break trust, and we continue to communicate. And sometimes it's hard or it's messy or whatever. But when that stops, right, or that starts getting minimized out of whatever reason, it doesn't get better over time, right? I mean,
No. Right.
your best case scenario is it stays where it's at as a peaceful coexistence, maybe. Most likely, though, it continues to fracture over
It
time.
does, yeah. It creates a certain kind of dissonance over time. And so those relationships just get further and further apart, where what we start to see is something called cordial hypocrisy. It's a term coined by Dr. Fernando Flores, which
Okay.
basically means we're going to say, yes, great idea, Dad, because there's been so much control for so long.
Yeah.
The outside reaction to that is often pretense, or I give up, or we might just say, I quit. Whatever you say is fine. And then when Dad is on the other side of the daisies, we go ahead and figure out how to do things the way we want to do them. So when there's a lot of control, we get this thing called cordial hypocrisy, where we're saying yes on the outside, but on the inside, we're saying no way.
So the control is being driven by fear,
Right.
which breaks down the trust and communication,
Right.
which leads to cordial hypocrisy.
Exactly.
And so some of that comes back to then too. It's like, okay, so how do you start with the control piece?
Yeah.
Like where do you then work on yourself? Because it's always about how much we work on
Right, so,
ourselves,
yeah,
right? Versus
yeah.
pointing the finger at others.
Right.
On that starting point of control. And
Yeah.
is control and fear? Talk a lot about fear and greed, right?
Mm-hmm,
That are strong motivators for people. But is that fear component that drives control, is that the starting point? Or is there something even that precedes?
Yeah, I think we have to address the fear, the concern, the worry. The way we address it is we have a conversation to say, okay, how are we going to make sure this conversation stays safe?
Yeah.
What do we need to have this conversation work well? 9 out of 10 times, people are saying, I just want to be heard. I never feel like I can get my point across, or it's not safe for me to say what I want to say, because in families, there's often competition, and with that comes judgment. And so there's also a concern of speaking truth to power. They're afraid that there'll be some sort of effect. If I say something negative, then I might get dinged
Punished
in some way. Yeah, and for some families, wealth is used as a weapon, right? If you don't toe the line, then you don't get X. So it's really by aligning, like back to that same comment around care, when people feel really understood, they feel listened to, that's when you can make something happen. There's a quote out there that says, truly being listened to is the closest thing to being loved. So it's not a skill that we actually have in spades. Most often people are reloading while they're listening.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a conversation of my point and your point and my point and your point. And so when we're fighting to be right, we can't be in relationship.
And so I love that last part. There's an attorney that I was speaking with at one point, and he said that same thing in a little bit of a different way, but it was those same two words. He's like, I'm choosing relationship over being right.
Exactly.
Like, there's just certain things that we're going to disagree on and engage, differently with future generations and how we think about it. But I want to choose relationship because that's going to give staying power to the future versus if I dig in just to be right, there is no relationship in the future.
That's right.
And that becomes that fracture point too.
It was actually Kirby that said this to me. We were working together on a family, Kirby Rossblock, and what she said was all of this great governance work that happens has to sit on a solid foundation. And the trust and communication piece is that solid foundation. Sometimes families will come to us after they've worked on, spent years building this incredible governance structure, and it's solid. But the complaint is we don't know how to work together inside of that. And it's usually because that trust and communication piece is missing. It was interesting when Roy did that research. What happened in the day was that there was a saying out there that 30% of businesses would successfully transition to the second generation. I think it went all the way back to Ward, and it went back to MIT, and then there were some other folks that claimed similar statistics. So if it was a 30% success rate, Roy and Vic Pricer wanted to know, well, what's happening with the other 70%? What's going on there? And so that's what really kicked off the 20-year field study. They worked with the University of Oklahoma to get this peer-reviewed and solid results. And so what they found was that of that failure rate, 60% had to do with trust and communication, more than half. And the research was done a long time ago, but my experience for the last 15 years and what you read about in the Times or the Journal, if you look at why those families go into court-related or looking for litigation, it's usually because somebody wasn't understood. Somebody didn't feel like somebody cared about them.
Right. And I guess if you were to bet $1 on the over/under, that number is probably higher today than it is. With all the tools we have for communication now, there's the facade. There's an individual. It's like, the facade. The great facade is that communication actually happens.
Yeah.
And we think we're speaking, which gets back to your point on listening, and listening being the closest thing to love at that point in terms of the expression of that active listening that comes in, because a lot of people are speaking, and there's a lot in social media, and there's a lot on podcasts or in writing or otherwise that people just get bombarded with. And then the half-life of that retention component, and then the intentionality that gets brought into it with the people you say you care most about. Right, your children, your grandchildren, the future generations.
And my experience is it's a skill, and I agree. Technology is wiring that out of us. It's actually distancing people. If you sit on the subway or if you just walk through the streets, you can see that everybody's got their head in their phone. We've developed a sixth sense of who's in our path. Right. Somehow we can navigate crowds by reading on our phones. But that skill of how do you sit next to somebody who recently lost someone close to them and say, how are you? That's not as available as it used to be, I think.
So before I turn to the chapter on legacy, this series on entrepreneurial legacies, how do you define legacy? How do you personally look at this? Because we were speaking in preparation for this, right? We each celebrated our respective 35th anniversaries with our spouses. You have 2 adult children. I tell people all the time, I have the honor, right, the humbling honor to work with just fantastic families and learn from them, right? As much as I'm giving, I'm getting in return. And I go home and talk to Melissa, and I'm like, oh, honey, wait, what do you think about this? Right? What do you think? Leaving the details out of it to protect the family and confidentiality. It's like, how do we think about what we're doing too? What is the word legacy to mean to you personally, and how do you even think about that within your own family?
I think about it as a tribe. For me, legacy goes all the way back from our ancestors. If I look all the way back through, my maiden name is Zagorski, and then even the Castoro family, and I keep going back. There's a certain quality of pride that comes from that. Like, who are we as a family? And then as I look at how we're navigating the complexity of the world today, how are those same values or who we are, virtues, organizing us into the future? But for me, legacy is a belonging. It's a tribe that we belong to. It's a place we can always find our feet. It's a place we can look at our back and say, here's how we navigated hardship or where we were successful in the past. And this is what's possible going forward because we have each other's back.
So taking that construct of legacy and then overlaying it, you spoke about your work, previously on family governance. How do you think about family governance construct that's saying it's solid on that foundation? And does legacy fit into that? Does family governance fit into the legacy component? Like, which is the chicken and which is the egg as you...
it's not that black and white. So back to that research, 60% was trust and communication, 25% was air preparedness. And what I mean by air preparedness is why their head comes off the pillow every day. So if what they care about doesn't fit in the construct of the governance, then they feel like a black sheep. Worked with a family where very competitive. I think there were 4 siblings, 3 of them top schools, working productively and successfully. Last one, quit school. Didn't do much with his life. Actually show up to the family meeting and sat at the far end of the table. So when we look at where he fit, he really didn't fit in that construct. When the conversation turned to philanthropy, sort of peeked up through his long bangs, and you could see a little bit of a light in his eye. And you said, so what about this conversation's interesting? He said, well, if we could finally use our wealth to have a good impact on the people right here in the community, that's meaningful. And so the sibling said, yeah, well, you never went to school, or yeah, you don't have a clue about how to do anything. You don't even live in a nice house, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
they all
yeah,
had
yeah,
standards.
Yeah.
And so finally we said, well, what are the standards? If this guy wants to work in the foundation, what's the hoops that he has to jump through? They had a big conversation. He agreed to what he was willing to do. 7 years later, runs the foundation. Well, he did that within the first year, and then by 2 years, he was actually running it. But for the next 5 years, foundation did ever better than it ever had done.
Really?
So in that conversation, it's a little bit of both. It's what do they care about?
Right.
Where is it safe for them to say what they want to do?
Yeah.
Another example is a 27-year-old in a family, a last name everybody would recognize. We have the first family meeting and he doesn't show up. So I get a hold of him and I said, where are you? And he said, I'm on the golf course. I said, meeting's not on the golf course. He said, yeah, I decided not to come. And I said, why is that? And he said, because I'm tired of getting yelled at. I'm tired of always getting shot down. And the whole reason we got involved was because the dad was concerned that this guy was playing too many video games in the basement and not quite making anything of himself. Great school, great education, but never could find any traction. So I said, great, come to the meeting tomorrow and let's have that conversation. Yeah. He said, what conversation? I said, the one where you're always getting shot down.
Yeah.
So we supported him through that. And he said, I'm the youngest. Every time I say I want to do something, you guys tell me how it's not possible. You tell me it's a bad idea. You tell me it won't make enough money. So I'm going to just quit.
Right,
I'll get enough money.
What's the point? Yeah.
I don't need this hassle.
Yeah.
I'm fine. Love video games. So I'm okay here.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the jaws dropped around the family. They had no idea of this pattern of communication that happened from a very young age. And the dad is nodding his head like, oh, yeah, I know where that came from. His family was the same.
Gotcha.
So at the end of the meeting, we said, so what do you really want to do? And he said, this family's not in real estate. And I think that could be really interesting. I'd love to build homes for people. And they said, yeah, but we've never. And I said, time out. That's exactly what he's talking about.
Right.
So it was the spouse that raised his hand and said, I'm in construction. If you want to shadow me for a little while, come check it out. And sure enough, here they are now doing real estate deals together. So
okay. I know I said I was going to turn the page to go to the legacy chapter for a second, but now I want to come back to a few other items that you just hit on. Sure. Because the case examples, right? This gets back to wisdom. This gets back to you can't automate that. You can't write a script for it. You can't tap in and say how to. Right. It's those lived experiences with someone, like you said, that's gone through a tragedy or is hard because there's an emotional, being that's trying to figure out their purpose, right? And why they were born and how they fit in. And if they're not fitting in at their own family table, then they're going to go seek that on the golf course or other places and how to do that. Yeah. So then you bring in two other dynamics, one on philanthropy and one on spouses that have married into the family. Yeah. So let's actually go down this a couple detours here, right?
Okay.
The aspect of it's hard enough in your own family of origin, but then individuals that are marrying into that family, two sides of that coin. If individuals that might be listening that are marrying into a family of wealth, and I've heard it, right? I can never live up to this. Exactly. Or then the family being sensitive to that because this is someone that loves their child in a way. Yeah. How should they both be thinking about that dynamic now when it's not their family of origin and they're coming into it?
Yeah, we always talk about the individual and the collective. So often in families, the individual bloodline is where the priority is, but it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in a collective. And so the spouse has 50% say of what's going to happen to their children. Mm-hmm. And when we exclude that voice, we end up creating more friction because they are going to have a say in how those kids are raised and what their lifestyle looks like. So not including their voices from the beginning is usually a recipe for disaster. In some cases, the spouses bring a leveling orientation. They didn't come from wealth. And so they bring a certain kind of ground or I don't want to call it desperation, but they bring a certain kind of realism in how the rest of the world operates and the fundamental values that they want to keep the kids grounded in. In one family, there was a woman who would go to pick up her son from grammar school, young, very young. And everyone would pull up in their Bentleys and their big Porsches and all of that. And she'd pull up in a nice car too, but she didn't hop out to pick up the kid in the backpack and carry them back to the car. She would wait and watch this 5-year-old with a backpack half his size lug it back to the car. And her motto was, in our family, we carry our own bags. And so I guess I'm saying that because the spouses often bring a leveling orientation that's very helpful. Also, because we are a learning program, right? That trust and communication, if we're not teaching that to the whole family, then we can't improve the fabric of how they coordinate together.
Play it out a little bit further. So the individual that may have not come from a lot, or looks at it and just has a bad family history with wealth, or is, whatever, they've given it all away, generously, and they live very modestly, and they marry into this family of wealth then that's going through, here's what we're doing with the estate and the structure and all of that, and what we believe that the legacy component can live on through the stewardship of the wealth. When that individual's coming into that family, what would you encourage them to pause and to listen, right? To listen and to love, of going, not money in and of itself isn't the problem, right? That's not the bad here. What prejudices and prejudgments could they possibly have that could be harmful to the individual that they're marrying into?
Yeah, what I see most often is they're just not comfortable with wealth.
Okay.
They don't know how to live in a big home, drive nice cars, and still feel like they can be kind, that they can be generous, that they can hold, they don't lose sight of themselves inside of that. They can raise well-adjusted kids inside of that. So I think it's finding that place of, how do I step into and own this lifestyle that I'm now in, but still keep my grounding.
Yeah. And then how does the family, and not even the significant other, but maybe the extended family, right? Other, siblings, maybe the patriarch, matriarch, in terms of the wealth creation aspect and representing the family more broadly. How do they welcome that individual into the family meetings, into the dialogue, into a loving family relationship?
I wish it was a different answer, but it's really trust and communication. We worked with a family, it was a billionaire family, and one of the sons married a woman who came from humble beginnings, and she shopped at Target. Even though they had a lot of money, she would show up at events dressed in clothes from Target. And it wasn't until they said, okay, we get it. We get that's important to you, and we accept you, and we understand you, and we care about you, and we're okay with it.
Yeah.
So she felt accepted. But that's less about what they're doing. It's more about a family value that says, we love you for who you are.
Yeah.
And we can support that. And back to that research, it was 60% trust and communication, 25% air preparedness. That last piece was values, was 10% only.
Okay.
But it was an important 10%. That speaks to who we are as a tribe. That speaks to who we are as a legacy.
And the value, and this is where you look at it and you're like, wow, that's actually, it is 100%, right? But it's like this aspect of going, the interconnectedness of all of this has to be maybe a word that's overused, but it is holistic in terms of how you're engaging your family.
No question about it. Yeah, a lot of families will start with the values. Mom and dad will sit down with their advisor and say, okay, here's our values. But the trouble is, if we don't have really good trust and communication, if there's an accent on control, then those values become marching orders. And it's exactly what the kids will not do. So that's why we don't start with values. We start with that learning program on how do we have better communication? How do we take trust to the next level? Because if we just start with, these are our values, then we're not going to get much traction.
So then philanthropy.
Yes.
There's only 3 places money goes: taxes, your philanthropic causes, or to your family, right?
Yes.
And so, and I'm a firm believer that families will better allocate capital to societal ills than the government will. It's just that's The World According to John.
Okay.
And so if we can cut out taxes, income, estate, capital gains, and move it to charitable and family buckets, then there's a lot of the work, and that gets into the technical work aspect of it. But then the philanthropic component of that change then of being a good investor into causes that make a difference in your community, the country, the world at large, is also a great way to communicate values, is a great way to prepare heirs, is great. So how do you think about the philanthropic topic broadly and how that fits into this overall family structure? Because it can happen at a really young age too.
Oh, it does. Yeah. I mean, that's when it happens the best, I think.
I agree.
When these younger kids, that family we worked with were the 3 kids, 6, 9, and 11. The mom did say at the end of the meeting, guys, what's important to you? And the son said, there's these turtles and they're eating way too much plastic. And so she ran with that. She said, okay, let's look at turtle rehabilitation programs.
Yeah.
And the daughter said, in school, the teachers never have enough supplies. Excuse me. And so she said, okay, great. Let's get the teachers some more supplies. So, excuse me, philanthropy happens not just because of a family value of giving. That's important. But where it becomes useful is where they're giving to things that really matter, why they care.
Yes. And so then you're back to they're finding their purpose. What do they care about? I mean, all of the bigger picture of how they may run the business or find it actually starts at a young age. I mean, those formative years absolutely comes into play.
One of the best things I heard was when a child got new stuffed animals or for Christmas, then they would figure out which ones are going out, which ones are we getting rid of. And that just really worked because they were able to say, I want to give these away and make room for the new ones. We worked with a family where the mom had a pretty sizable foundation, and she had 2 young adults. They were in their early 30s. One was in the LGBTQ community. She worked for a nonprofit, atheist, and ran a suicide hotline. Her brother was a devout Catholic, deeply committed to the Catholic Church, married, 2 children, worked very hard, primarily as a fisherman. So when the mom came to us and said, we'd like the family values to drive the foundation and we want the kids to run it. So we interviewed the kids and they just looked at each other and said, no way, right? Our values are incredibly different.
Right.
So when we got them together and we had some important conversations about their relationship and why they mattered to each other and what they each cared about, what got revealed was the daughter said she cares about the young people who call the suicide hotline because they can't find their way. And she wants to continue funding that. And the brother said, the church is doing some incredible missionary work for young people in Africa, and I want to continue with that. And so as they understood each other and as their relationship improved, what they were able to do is say, we care about young people.
Yeah.
And so the funds were distributed that way.
Yeah.
But if we got stuck on what their values were, like religious, they wouldn't have been able to get there. But what we were able to get to is what they really cared about, what mattered to them. And then we can find that arc. When we do the values and mission exercise with families, some are afraid to speak because it hasn't been safe for them to express what they really care about. And so in this meeting where they learn how to listen and they learn how to make a request to have the space to be heard, then we have understanding. And then everything goes. And then we can find a way to make it work for both.
And those skill sets, this is, it just keeps coming back to the different buckets of capital, right? And so much time gets spent on the financial capital. Which again, we're Clearwater Capital. We believe in a capitalistic view of asset allocation in terms of being productive, not to an end into itself, but as a means then back to be doing other things. And if that's in the world around you, if that's enjoying it, which you enjoy it, then that's the purpose in terms of the end that comes in. It's the time and the attention to the human and the intellectual capital and the development of that in the subsequent generations. It's like, it's almost the, if you're bringing that one stuffed animal and you're giving 2 away, it's like for every hour you spend on financial capital, be spending a few hours on the human and intellectual capital development of that future generation, because the more time you do that, the more you will build trust and confidence. The more your fear will diminish, right? Which then brings down that facade of control in a lot of ways, in order then to engage the next people. But you have to be intentional about what you're training. That's why I go back to the reference I read of that the first book, of that should be the focus of these families in terms of how you develop the next generation on that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn to chapter 10.
Okay.
Pretty sure it's chapter 10 here in your book, again, Bridging Generations, and it's entitled Your Legacy. And so now, even on this piece, I go back and read the quote you have here. The first one is by Einstein. This one's by Harry Truman. I have found the best way to give advice to your children is to find out what they want and advise them to do it. Right? I mean, it's like that. It's like that. Well, what's your purpose? And your purpose might not be working in the family business, and that should be celebrated, and then figure out how do they go off and achieve that, build real estate, and still be part of the family. And it's a both and it shouldn't be an either or. So in this chapter you go on, we have distilled our 52 plus years of investigating how successful families transition their wealth into 5 steps the family can take. Now, in reading that, this is a legit 52 years. There's way too many, you see organizations that put out, we have 100 years of experience. It's like, well, no, you have 50 people that have 2 years of experience each that add up. This is, 52 years that has been a work in progress in learning and an evolution into itself. The 5-step process has withstood the test of time and continues to add value and applies to families. I'll hit on the 5 steps just to read them out here for listeners. And then we'll come back into a couple of them. The first step, leadership, taking the initiative to beat the odds. Second step, securing your wealth transition plan. Third step, turning wealth transition plan deficiencies into an action plan for success. Fourth, preparing your family members. Fifth, family members' self-preparation and responsibilities. So we could go down a lot of different paths there. Is there any one of those that jump out to you of going, yeah, you know what, if there's one takeaway for listeners here that they need to be thinking about, is it the leadership? Is it securing the plan? Is it the wealth transition deficiencies being identified, preparing the family members, or the family members' self-preparation? And it's not a sequence. It's these things are all happening all in real time.
I think it's the estate attorney, Nancy Henderson, said it best. She said, I cannot write an estate plan that fixes your kids. I cannot write an estate plan that fixes your kids. And for me, it's self-development. It's learning that moment where you can feel the fear rise and you're able to have a skill for yourself that says, okay, what do I need in this moment? Instead of being run by the fear, being able to choose a different action. We launched last year our first program into the Next Generation Leaders Institute. And that was the whole orientation came from how does this next generation carve their own path? How do they start to build the skills that they can weave into their own family culture so that wealth is a force for good in their lives?
And I'm going to go through a couple of the details of the institute because you have an upcoming time for individuals to register, and I'll hit on the details of that. But in that self-development, and for good or bad, 20-somethings, early 30-somethings, 40, where individuals might be in their own journeys, and saying, yeah, this is something I want to do and work on. And I'll contrast that against, I've had other individuals, again, back to the patriarch and matriarch, feeling like we feel like we've been, and I've heard the term puppet masters, right? We're guiding the kids almost too much into what we think that they should be doing and saying that this is important for you. I'm a firm believer in you can't want something more for someone else than they want for themselves.
Right.
Right. And if the next gen and the kids don't want this for themselves, it's really hard to be like, okay, I'm going to continue to force you to do this because they're adults in their own right.
Exactly.
And how you're approaching that.
Yeah.
Side note, back to why you need to start when they're 5 years old, right? And in those really early years when you can have more of an influence as a parent. So those individuals from the next generation component in their self-preparedness, what should they be thinking about as they're listening to say, yeah, here's what I want to engage in. And before you go there, I'll give a few of the details here, because registration is now open for the Next Gen Leaders Institute, May of 2026. This is going to be at the Four Seasons Hotel in Austin, Texas, Thursday, May 28th to Sunday, May 31st of 2026. So it is coming up, so there is time to register for it and be in there with travel the day before, so really Wednesday the 27th through Sunday, May 31st. There's a lot of time and intensity. What's the profile of the individual that's going to be in the room that others should be considering, so that they're amongst their peer group, that they're learning from and taking in the content, and what would be the motivation of the outcome that they could expect from participating? Yeah,
the age is roughly 30 to 50. So, if they're in their high 20s, we can consider that. But usually 30 to 50 is the age range. And the reason we pick that is because around that time, they're starting to wake up and say, oh, I do have a life that I get to choose my own way, right? There will be a legacy. How they intentionally shape that is up to them. And so that's the moment where they stand up and they say, yeah, I'd like to create wealth for my own family. Or, I know I was born to run this part of the family business, but I really don't want to. So what this course is, 4-day program, is about finding their authentic sense of purpose, what they really care about, and what actions, what skills do they need to execute on that. So we had folks that came to this program, and they've gone through other programs that are built for Next Gen, which are great. They focus on governance. They focus on understanding the different advisors that support the family, how the family office works, all of the things that are really important. This is a deeper dive on authenticity, on being able to speak truth to power, on conflict is expensive. So how do they navigate conflict in a way that they enroll others into their vision? We also find that in many of these entrepreneurial families, it's in the DNA. These kids are growing up to be entrepreneurs. So what's the self that they need to be able to lead more effectively? Okay. So it's all about who they are becoming and how they're carving their own path inside that big shadow or pressure of wealth. As much as we say it, in many families, wealth drives the family. When we can flip that so that the family is driving the wealth, that happens by the individual taking a stand for what they care about and building the skill to be able to express that in a way that they're heard. Right. It is kind of fascinating how this wealth concept becomes the driver versus being the tool. Yeah. And it's like there's no other tool that ends up leading an individual or a family like this subject of wealth, which in the end is, numbers and legal documents. And so I don't minimize that. Again, that needs to be done well, but it's to be wealth management is about managing the wealth. Exactly. It's not the other way around. And yet the intensity of that, how much time is preparing the human capital, preparing the heirs, preparing the understanding of that self-leadership so that they can figure out whether they're marrying into it, whether they're part of it, whether they've inherited it. Just pop into mind, Amy Hart Klein's book, on finding her voice, creating her legacy. In terms of wealth comes to all of us in very, very different ways, and how we end up processing that to manage it and not let it control us, because that's, I think, when things can go south for people. Yeah, I agree. The families that we've worked with that have been successful, meaning they've been able to maintain family unity and control of the assets, are doing exactly that. They're taking time out to invest in education about communication and trust. I think we said it earlier, trust is the foundational principle on which all of this rests. And so learning to become skillful at building, managing, and repairing trust, that's more than half the game. Yeah. And so if people want to, so for the Next Gen, for this, the event that the Institute has coming up for Next Gen, currently, and it is kind of funny because Next Gen, people think about it as, okay, that's the teenagers and the 20-somethings. It's like, well, no, you end up with Next Gen that are, 60s, 70s, right? Sometimes, and they're the Next Gen. If people want to find out more information, what is the website? Where would they go to get more information and register? TheWilliamsGroup.org. That everything is right there.
TheWilliamsGroup.org.
Yeah, that's where they can find it.
Okay. And if listeners want to send us an email at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com, we can pass that link along as well, because I do think that that's going to be an impactful. And there is a lot of information online, and I think you even have some preparatory sessions so people can get even a little bit of a taste of before they register.
Absolutely,
as well. So when you take this the family governance concept again very, very broadly, and we're to sum it up as we start to wrap this all up. If someone was to say, "Here's where I need to start on what is that starting point? Where do they start pulling the thread overall?"
I think it's a straightforward question. I think it's, what does preparedness look like to you? So if I had a son or a daughter, which I do, gratefully, I'm wealth adjacent. I can't say I'm in the same category as a lot of our clients, but I might start with saying something like, as you know, someday there's a good chance this inheritance will come your way. What do you feel you need to be prepared for that? And what does that look like? How can I support you in that? That's already flipping the script, where in the past, you might have been the one to tell them what they need to do. But as young adults, or even as young children, the minute you tell them one thing to do, they're going to do the exact opposite. Yeah. So it's asking them the questions of, what does preparedness look like? And the second question I would ask is, how do you see you can contribute? In what way do you want to be a part of this legacy? Right. And what does that contribution look like? Is it time? Is it networks? Is it how you're showing up in the community?
Wow, tying back into the intro, that on wisdom and gaining wisdom, there's a saying, I don't know who I'm supposed to give attribution to, but there's a saying, they'll know you're wise not by what you say, but by what you ask. And so if you want to pass on wisdom, it comes from not what you're telling and you're broadcasting and you're communicating to your children or to your team members, but what are you asking them? What are you teasing out in terms of where they're leading? Yeah. And from there, you can impart wisdom so that they can go off and achieve what it is that they want to achieve too.
Somebody once said to me, be curious, not critical. And when you can be really curious about another person's perspective, it opens up a whole new level of connection and the conversation will start to flow. So I think asking the beautiful questions, as they say.
Well, in the Williams Group, I mean, you do have tools, especially on the front end of a relationship. If someone's saying, we want to engage the Williams Group, we want to go deeper, we absolutely, out of the work, and we were talking about Tom Livergood earlier and his founding of the Family Wealth Alliance, in his transition with that, and Rachel, continuing to lead that. Yeah. Still firm believer in the way that they've structured the service standards that come out of that work. And so from there, when we think about wealth management very broadly, or how multifamily offices should be thinking about the subjects, this topic, but the expertise that you have, we don't have, and we're never looking to insource it because of the history, the 52 years, and counting that you all bring to it. But you start with asking questions. You actually start with a couple different diagnostic tools. What would a family expect from the Williams Group if they're to say, yeah, we want to engage, but we still don't know exactly how to start pulling that thread?
We start at the shallow end of the pool. We start with something called a family readiness assessment. So remember that research we talked about? That included over 3,000 families. And we were able to get a benchmark of what's the likelihood of a successful transfer. Again, family maintains unity and control of the assets. So with a 50-question confidential, anonymous assessment, families can take it in probably 40 minutes. They can complete that. Okay. We can give them an indication of where trust, preparedness, and alignment of values sit with respect to that minimum threshold. Okay. We can then use that same assessment at the end of our process where they can see how those levels have changed. Okay. Whether or not we work with a family depends on two things. One, are they willing to learn? And two, do they care more about each other or the assets? If they care more about the assets, then they need a really good estate attorney. But if they are more concerned with the relationships, then that's really our wheelhouse. But that's a nominal investment, $6,000. And it is a way to get a benchmark of how are we doing with trust? Yeah. And do we feel like we're prepared? And are our values on the same page? It's a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
At least a way to get the conversation started. Whether
Yeah.
or not we work with them depends on those two other questions.
And that aspect of the amount of money spent on so many other topics, and saying this is about your family,
Right.
this is about the people you say you love the most, this is about transitioning well. The death rate is still 100%. We're still all going to,
Yeah.
end up,
Yeah.
passing on at some point in time. Are you making those investments in the human capital that is your family?
Exactly.
So before I give you the closing words, thoughts, what's on, the proverbial, what's on your bookshelf? What are you reading right now as you're taking in and continuing to just learn and develop yourself?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Honestly, the book that's right open on my desk right now is a book that Roy wrote called Philanthropy, Heirs, and Values.
Okay.
It's a book written a long time ago, also with Vic Pricer. And I'm reading it because so many of the families these days are coming into wealth at younger and younger ages.
Yeah.
And that particular book has a pretty good breakdown of the different ages that
Yeah.
are useful to introduce concepts and topics to kids.
Well, and I think it goes to, I didn't bring that one in. It's on my bookshelf too. I was looking at it. Because the work that you're all doing has staying power.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about, markets in a day or a week, or you're talking about your family and generations to come. And that has staying power in the work that you've all done. So very grateful for it.
Yeah.
Closing thoughts, closing words of wisdom, calls to action. How do you leave listeners today?
Be proactive. That the biggest risk to families is not talking about the wealth. And when I say the wealth, I mean the richness of the family, what the family cares about, who they are, what their contributions are. Wealth is a bigger conversation than just the assets.
Yeah.
But I think it's be proactive and take action. And that action could be something as small as, rather than the next gen asking mom and dad if we're rich, it's asking the next generation, hey, do you guys think we're wealthy? And how is that for you? And how do you manage the Uber when you're the one that keeps paying for it because they expect you to?
Right.
So
right.
I think just normalizing the conversation rather than trying to pretend that they're not wealthy. I think the sooner they can do that, the better. The other place that I'd pay attention to is, if we look at 60% trust and 25% preparedness and 10% values, it leaves 5%. That 5% is where the tax strategies and the estate planning happens. And yet 95% of people's time is spent there, where the biggest risk is actually 95% outside of that.
Right.
So I think focusing on what really matters is probably the message I'd want to part with.
Right. And I'm going back to that Einstein quote. Problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them.
Yeah.
You're spending 95% of your time, and you need to spend time on those other subjects. You also need to start increasing that allocation of time on this subject. Amy, thank you so much for being in the studio, taking time out while you're here in the Chicago area. Again, it's thewilliamsgroup.org. People can go find additional information, resources available. Listeners, please contact us if you'd like to get in contact with the Williams Group and Amy's team. Books we've mentioned, questions that may arise. This is really important work, and as we move from this knowledge-based society towards this wisdom, again, thank you, Mark Phillips, for that piece. Your email was so timely, you don't even know it yet. As you're listening, it's just so grateful as we all shift and figure out how do we leverage technology, how do we invest in it, and then how do we also not lose our humanness in our human experience with those we care about the most. Thank you again for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you. Having a blessed day.